If you know how much we spoke anyway, we don't need to speak anymore on this webinar as much as we're in contact. It's wonderful to see all of you and Happy New Year. We're also thankful that you are in our community. And our goal is to make this an interactive workshop. I would replace the word webinar on the website, but it would take too much time. So moving forward, let's just call it an interactive workshop. I'm looking forward to muting people who will be speaking. I don't want to mute people, but I'll do it. Okay. It's so good to see all of you. Now, what I want to talk about today is the importance of the sentencing narrative. And I got a text from someone who's been with us for a while, and he's like, "Hey, man, I've already been sentenced. Do I need to join the webinar on this narrative and sort of how that works?" And this is someone that worked with our team after sentencing, and he never actually wrote one. So even though it is frequently called or is phrased by Michael Santos, our partner, the sentencing narrative, fair to say at any stage of the journey, you're going to want to create an asset that you can build on, which is why wherever you are, you just got a letter, you've been indicted, you're going to prison, wherever, you want to take the time to draw a line in the sand and really create this life story. Forrest and I will spend a few minutes going through some interactive role play about what makes this great. Now, I want to share the name of a lawyer. I had a great call with him earlier today. His name is Scotty. Pronounce it. Is it Vadim in Chicago?
Vadim.
He's a great lawyer. So we worked with,
Awesome.
and I'm just going to share something that he said on the call. Vadim, we had a client with him, and the client's like, "This guy's professional, honest, and hardworking. This is a great freaking lawyer." So we interviewed him, we spoke with him, we referred a client of ours in Chicago to him today. And when I spoke with him, I could tell he's a great lawyer in part because he said, "I know my role as a lawyer. I know my role. I know what a defendant has to do, and I don't have the skill set to do that. Namely, helping a defendant truly express through the written word why they're a candidate for leniency." And that, by the way, is when you know you have a great lawyer. So before we get into some Q&A with Forrest, as a reminder, Michael interviewed Judge Boo. And you're going to see some marketing videos coming out soon with this specific phrase by Judge Boo, and because it's really pissed off a lot of lawyers, like lawyers who are friends of mine that I've golfed with. They're like, "You should take that down." I'm like, "I didn't say it, a judge did." In the video, Judge Boo said 0 to 1% of the remorse factor that comes from lawyers influences him. I didn't say the plea agreement. A lawyer has a huge role in that. I didn't say other factors that only a lawyer can do, but the remorse component, 0 to 1%. So when people in our community say, like, "I have great lawyers and they're doing that for me," I will be direct. I don't even know what that means. I have no idea what it means because it's inconsistent with what we've heard from judges. So this lawyer, Vadim, clearly got that, which is why he's a really successful lawyer. My point is, wherever you are in the process, you've got to create. And I want you to get in the habit of writing something and then building it. I'm going to briefly share something with you that Michael Santos taught me, and it's something our team uses. Every piece of content he has created, he adds to this sheet. This is what I want all of you to consider doing, presuming you want to write and presuming you actually want to document your growth and progress, because this is something that people in our community are actually sharing with their probation officer. Can you see my screen, Scotty, where it's okay? This is an internal content sheet for our team. And I'm not going to go through every piece because you all know we produce so much content, it is absurd. My point is, people in our community are actually creating content, some on their blog, some internally, some on Prison Professor Talent, and they are sharing it with their pretrial services officer. They are sharing it with their probation officer, and they are sharing it with their network. So this is an example of a title. Or if everyone can mute themselves, because this we're teaching and this is important. This is what helps people get better outcomes. If you can mute yourself or leave the webinar while we're speaking.
I won't be here, so you have to engineer.
Scotty, if you could mute everyone, we're working here on the Monday after the new year. Hold on a second. We want the best outcome. This is the work we're going to do. So this is an example of a content sheet. So as you begin to write a blog or your narrative, I would encourage you, to the extent that you can, document it. Eventually, everything piece of content you see here will become a tweet. It will become a podcast. It will become an Instagram post. My marketing might be different than yours. You're my stakeholder. Your stakeholder is a judge. Book reports. You know how we never ask you to do what our team doesn't still do and document? Here are book reports our team has produced, and many more of them will be coming. In time, you will see this on a blog, a podcast. Are you writing book reports? Are you documenting them? Because when you are reading and learning, that's how you develop content. When you are reading and learning and writing, that's how you can measure your growth. And Forrest and I will spend some time on that today. To the person last week who sent this great message to me, who said, my lawyer told me it is too late because I'm getting sentenced. It is never too late to begin building. Even if you just got sentenced, here's a piece of advice for you. If you wrote the document today, and even if at the end of the document it said, Your Honor, I have no idea what I will do for the rest of my life. I have no idea how I'm going to make money. I have no idea how I will pay this restitution and sustain myself. That is an honest, authentic message, because if the person then says, but I intend to do this or try in the months ahead, if he actually does it, then we have like a baseline. We can measure what he wrote today, and then we can show progress in 6 months. We can show progress in a year. 18 months, he can say, Your Honor, on January 6, 2025, I wrote you this letter that said I can't get out of bed or brush my teeth because I'm so devastated. I say sorry, but I don't really know what that means. Here's progress. Then, according to Judge Boo and Judge Bennett, you begin to look consistent and authentic. You can't lie, which is why it has to be written, whether you do it with our team or do it on your own. But don't think for a moment this can be outsourced or written in the third person. Hi, I'm writing today on behalf of Scotty Carper, my friend. Your Honor, I want to tell you why Scotty shouldn't go to prison. Those are character reference letters. They're third on the list in order of mitigation. As a reminder, Judge Boulware at a sentencing conference said to me on stage, the order of mitigation follows: the defendant, lawyer, no disrespect to the lawyer, Judge Boulware's a lawyer. They want to hear from the defendant. What have you learned? Where are you going? How do you make amends? If you created victims, how do you identify with them? The lawyer, 3, he said, was friends and family. It's important, not as important as people think. Someone reached out last week and said, I have 75 letters. Is that good? I said, it's too many. I have no idea. All I really care about is what you have done. So that's the takeaway for the first 9 minutes of our webinar in 2025. What have you done to demonstrate to a judge why you're a candidate for leniency? If you didn't get the outcome you wanted, that's life. Can't change the past. We're not magicians. What can you continue to build? That said, let's spend a few minutes. Perhaps Forrest can ask me a few questions, and then I'm hoping somebody can chime in and respond. I see Craig in our community. I see people who have retained our team, some people who have not, who come to leverage off our free resources. That's why we're here. But when we talk about a sentencing narrative, let me be very clear. Our goal, you should plan to get this to your probation officer. I don't care if you've already sat for your interview. I see Nicholas Kaiser, a great lawyer in New York, on this webinar. He gets the narrative to the probation officer. That is the goal, to the probation officer. The probation officer, we want to put the narrative in your completed probation report. Can anyone tell me why that's valuable on a macro level if you get the narrative in the probation report? Anyone at all? Why do we want it in there?
It will give the federal judge time to read your narrative letter in advance to contribute towards him making a greater decision for a better outcome of his sentence.
Great answer. By the way, I have your email. I'm going to respond. We're going to hook up this month. It's great to see you. Happy New Year. Yes, that aligns directly. By the way, if anyone
Happy
wants
New Year's.
If anyone wants a sample of this template, I'm not going to send it out. You got to message us and we'll send it to you, or I'll put it up. You got to begin creating a content sheet if you want to overcome the consequences of a conviction. We don't ask you to do what we don't do. You got to write, you got to build. Coming back to what was just said, that's exactly correct. We interviewed Judge Boo, and Judge Boo said 2 things. One, he would be impressed if he saw that a defendant took the time to write this letter well before sentencing. It shows it's not like a term paper in college where you wait till the night before. That's 1. 2 is articulated to us by Chris Maloney. The probation officer is going to recommend to the judge how long you should serve in prison. To the extent that you can influence that person, you should. Further, Chris Maloney, who we recently interviewed, said the first thing your probation officer is really required to do when you start probation is to look at your probation report. Therefore, if they're going to look at the PSR, does it make sense that you influence it with good messaging, your own message, and then create a narrative and assets in between? Because it could be years. Unfortunately, someone in our community is going to get like a 17-year federal prison sentence. It is a multi-billion-dollar fraud. It could have been 30 years. They're going to get 17. It's a long time. But he wants to build a record to be extraordinary and compelling. He wants to get the First Step Act. He'll do the drug program. He wants to develop a record. Maybe the judge in 7 years will let him out under the extraordinary and compelling component of the First Step Act. He said, I might as well do the work. It all starts with a probation interview. Build, 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 which is why you should get it to the probation officer as quickly as you can, presuming it has the right message. Oftentimes, people try to create it on their own, and the messaging is off. So can someone give me an idea of what the overall message should be of a sentencing narrative? What is the primary focus, if somebody can articulate that to me? What is the goal of the sentencing narrative? Can someone tell me?
Is that to take as much time off of your sentence as possible?
That's the result of the work. That's the outcome of what work. That's the goal, I know, of doing the work. But what should the messaging look like in a narrative? So you're sitting down to...
It should look like you're taking responsibility. It should look like your concern is for your victims and that you're willing to pay back and do everything necessary for restitution, and that and it really helps you with that letter.
That's correct. So I'm very proud to say that my kids are big into 80s music like me. And on the way to Monster Jam yesterday, we were listening to Depeche Mode's Greatest Hits. And there's a great line in Enjoy the Silence that says, words are meaningless. They can only do harm. The words can be meaningless if there isn't action, if there isn't follow through and follow up, which is what federal judges have said to us. A federal judge once told Michael Santos, here's what I expect from a white collar defendant. Happy talk. Make believe, exactly what I want to hear with no follow through, action, or any plans on the other side telling me exactly what I want to hear. That's data from a federal judge. You should embrace that. So if you are going to create your own sentencing narrative, I'm actually going to go through an example of one. It ain't about you. You didn't have bad intentions. You didn't end up here. The government sucks. We reviewed one that someone wrote recently. It was a tax case, basically said, I'm sorry. Then went on to blame how the Democrats spend more money in our budget. The wrong message. Unless you want 9 years in prison, that's fine. It may make you feel good. Cool. If you want 9 years, I would do it differently. Your choice. It's only about victims. And to the people who say, well, there is no victim, even if it is a victimless case, if US tax dollars are funding this investigation, there is a victim. Even if you've gone to trial and you are not accepting responsibility, you have an obligation to mitigate and demonstrate to a judge through your own words who you are, what you have learned, why you are different than the government's version of events. We have had people go to trial. The government asks for 40 years, they get 15. And I can point to specific examples. If you have gone to trial, I'll just share one with you. One of them might be the most loathed person that has ever been in our community. His name was Scott Tucker. We were on American Greed with him. Look at that face. He's not popular. The government at a sentencing asked for they said, we will ask for 40 years in prison if you don't appeal. He said, I didn't do anything wrong. Asked for life in prison. I didn't do anything wrong. Because of his mitigation, the building, way before sentencing, he got 16 years, 6 months in prison. It's not 40. He'll actually be home soon. My point is, trial or not, you have an obligation to demonstrate why you are different than their version of events. And it starts with the background. So Forrest, perhaps you can ask me a couple of questions, and then we're actually going to call on a couple of people to see how they would answer the questions. And then I see some questions coming along the side. By the way, you might know our colleague Forrest. He's been with us for a while, runs so much of the company, currently in law school, really educated dude. And I'm so grateful that he's on our team. So Forrest, unmute yourself and jump in.
Gladly, and thank you for the kind introduction. Everybody can hear me okay?
We hear you.
Wonderful. All right, so beginning this interview, what I'd like to do is start chronologically. So tell me first, how were you as a student? I know that you went to college. Tell me about how you performed.
My parents would tell you, and my teachers would tell you that I performed at the level that I was in, and if I had interest in the subject. So if I was in AP government and I liked it, I got an A and I passed the AP class. If I was in the worst track in biology and I didn't like it, they would tell you that I would fail the class or barely pass. So I was only engaged if I had interest. My parents said I only wanted to work if I had interest. And my mom said from a young age that would be kind of a weakness. And it was always difficult for me to get engaged in classes that I had zero interest in. And I still have that same problem today.
I think that is a perfect answer. And there's still
Thank you.
plenty to pull from that. You know, for example, where we're talking about, well, aptitude and what you are interested in, this, to my mind, the sentencing narrative is so much like a job interview, where the question itself doesn't matter. It is using that as an opportunity to get the information that you want across. So here, yeah, so there is certain subjects that you didn't excel at because you weren't interested in it. Same with me, and I think that's the same for a lot of people.
Well, I can tell you my lawyers told me, and this is true, everyone, that I was very much, this was in my letter to Judge Wilson. I'll tell you as if you're interviewing me, I was kind of a product of my environment. So when I was an athlete at USC, I was around virtuous dudes that worked hard. No cheating, no steroids, no shortcuts. They just work really hard. And then when I was a stockbroker, I tended to behave around people who might have been unethical. Those are people that I looked up to and admired. So I might have admired someone who might have been on their fourth marriage and had 7 drinks before they pulled into the home, or been 100 pounds overweight, but they made a lot of money and they had a nice watch. Those are the people I began to look up to. There also wasn't a focus on ethics and compliance. And if there were, I don't think I'd have been interested in it, because I never thought in a million years I would ever get into trouble or have compliance issues. So I think that aligns with, I just didn't have interest. And that's part of the reason I know I got into trouble. I admired the wrong people, looked up to the wrong people, ignored compliance and good decision making. And based on my background, I never thought I could get into trouble. I didn't know anyone that had gone to prison.
I know it was much the same for me. What then I'd like to ask, because it strikes me that you have had this realization and it would be important to convey that information to the judge. So let me ask you something, Justin. What are habits that you have today that you didn't have previously?
When I got fired from UBS for facilitating this fraud, my great lawyer, Bob Corbin, said to me, go get an effing job, like tomorrow. And I said, why? He said, this may take 2 or 3 years. And he said, you're no longer a stockbroker. Go get an effing job. I don't care what it is, or volunteer, but I would prefer that you work. And I said, well, why is that important? And his exact words were, David Willingham thinks you're a criminal. That's the U.S. attorney. He thinks you're a bad guy. He don't care that you went to USC along with him. And you need to somehow show that you can earn money as a law-abiding citizen. So work. So the best thing I think I've done since becoming a defendant is working. I reached out to my network. Many friends ignored me, avoided me. Some family, my dad's brother, abandoned me as if I did something to our family name. The press has been very devastating. Some people are making and mocking and making fun of me. But I have one friend, his name is Sam, who has agreed to hire me. And I'm working as hard as I can. And unfortunately, every dollar that comes in goes out to the lawyer. But I'm able to get by and also pay my health insurance. So I've been working. That's the best thing I've done as a defendant. Not much else, though.
Now, that is still very important to communicate to the court. It is the awareness of your circumstances and the fact that you are continuing to contribute positively to society now. So what documents, what evidence, what might we be able to bring up to the court in support of these activities?
So I'm meeting with Lynette Thompson, the person who interviewed me for my probation interview, and I'm meeting with her again. She needs some additional documents, and she commented that she was impressed that I had been working and selling real estate. And she's commented that I've been successful. And she appreciated that I have already committed to making a restitution payment before sentencing. And I'm hoping that will help me avoid prison. But as of right now, it looks like 31 to 41 months in prison. But the working I know is really influencing my probation. The person, Lynette Thompson, who wrote my probation report. It's in the report, which is very helpful. In fact, she commented that she was impressed of my ability to get another job and earn a significant income despite the fallout And it was really because a good friend believed in me and gave me a job that I'm earning. I work hard, but I'm grateful.
Well, for sure. And I understand being grateful for that job, but I see too that you switched industries, meaning that you had to build a new skill set. Perhaps you had to get licensure or accreditation. Tell me about that.
Did. So I lost my Security 7 licenses. And as soon as I was fired from UBS and knew that I had a chance to sell real estate, I said, I'm going to pass the real estate exam in like 3 weeks. And I studied 15 hours a day. It's not terribly hard to pass, truth be told. It's one of the easier exams if you're ever going to get a real estate license. And I studied for 3 weeks. I passed. And within about 4 months of getting fired from UBS, I was a licensed real estate agent. And I knew I had to get that license before any felony conviction, which would lead to losing of the license, which eventually happened. The point is, I would just stay up like 15 hours a day and study and pass the exam in about 3 weeks.
A remarkable thing that a lot, I'd say most defendants either aren't able to or are unwilling to do. So documenting that is going to be important both for that parole and probation officer, but also to the court. While we're talking about work, oh, I'm so sorry, Justin, please.
No. So this is very helpful. By the way, I would like someone maybe to, thank you, Forrest. We'll come back to this in a second. If someone would be vulnerable and answer or respond to this question, because something that Forrest and I have done as well, sometimes during an interview, if it's Forrest, Brad, they'll ask about the background. And this can be a very long interview. And eventually the background will come up. And if he were to ask about my background, I would be very honest. I had a silver spoon type background, a lot of privilege and the trips and the parents and everything. And some people are afraid to admit that in front of a judge because the judge might say, you knew better, right? If that's the case, you should really own and acknowledge that. You should own if you had success or money or privilege or background, because that is what judges are truly thinking, especially in the post-George Floyd climate of white privilege. Let's just own and embrace the reality here. It comes up at sentencing hearings that I've attended. Some judges have flat out said it. So if you've had that, you should embrace and own that, as I pretty much did in my narrative. But it's also very important if some of you have not had that upbringing that I had. Like Craig, can someone chime in? Has anyone here not had that upbringing that I had? Can anyone engage?
Yeah, sir.
Go ahead. So pretend you're me. If Forrest were to ask you, did you do Craig's narrative? Was that you or Brad?
I did the PSAT.
Okay, got it. Okay. So ask the question about the background, and then after you answer, try to be as succinct as you can, Craig, because we only have an hour. I will get into why it's different in a narrative and how I've seen judges commented on it.
Absolutely.
So I'll reframe this. Greg, tell me when you started working. What job was that?
Well, I had to start working at 9 years old, shoveling snow and creating a landscape business because I was born to a 16-year-old mother on her birthday, and I had everything that I needed in life, but not what I wanted in life. So in order to get the things that I might have wanted, like a pair of Nike sneakers, we had to put in the work at such a young age because we didn't have those amenities in our household.
So let me just jump in and share something. That's the most profound thing we've heard on this webinar thus far. So right out of the gate, if there are victims in Craig's case or in your case, you say, Your Honor, before, and I'll go through an example. If you take anything away from this narrative, let me be clear. I accept full responsibility for my conduct. I'm so grateful my lawyers are guiding me properly and suggesting that I share my own thoughts with you. I accept full responsibility for what I've done and victims have been created. Nothing in this letter is an excuse. This is if you pled guilty, of course. Nothing in this letter is an excuse. I want you to learn more about my life through my own words. I was born to a 16-year-old mother. So that is fundamentally different from me, where I would have said I was born with parents. I hit the parent lottery in life. Now, I want to share some evidence with you, and I've posted the transcript to this on the White Collar Advice blog. This is Mike Stoll in Ohio. Michael Santos did this interview.
45 years, and I have a sick wife.
He pled guilty to a crime. He had a lawyer that basically said to him, shut up, don't do anything. This is what you've paid me to do. I'm not turning in a letter to the judge or the probation officer. You will make a statement in court that is about 1 or 2 paragraphs. That's a wrap. So Mike was naturally frustrated and he said, "What do I do?" I said, "Well, what do you want to do, Mike?" He said, "I want to do what freaking Judge Bennett told me to do. I want to do the nuts and bolts of the work. What if my lawyer won't use it?" Do the work and create it. Take responsibility for your own life. So he wrote in that narrative. Well, we helped, but he wrote, he was honest with us. And that's another problem with the sentencing narratives, by the way. People lie, they put on airs, they show off, they're not transparent with us. We've heard everything you could possibly imagine. I got a call from someone whose husband is serving 90 years in a state prison. There's nothing we haven't heard at this point of the journey. Some people won't, they just won't tell us the truth, or they have not introspected enough to be able to even express what happened. That's a problem. So presuming you can speak openly and honestly, Mike said, "I'm going to write it." And he eventually got it to the lawyer. And the lawyer made fun of him because Mike said that at 9 years old, as Craig just said, that he began working with his father, delivering papers and milk bottles to make money. And the lawyer said, "This is all fluff and nonsense. You've got to be kidding me." And Mike said, "He hates it. What do I do?" I said, "It's your own life. I would do what Judge Bennett told you to do." Okay, he did it. Got it to the probation officer, actually without the lawyer even knowing, because many people just communicate directly with their PO. Then told the lawyer, "I'm going to fire you unless you submit it. And I'm going to submit a letter to the bar. Sorry." And the lawyer said, "Okay." And then when people are concerned with their own self-interest, they tend to do it. The lawyer said, "Fine, I'll submit it." In the memo, he did. And in the transcript that I posted on the White Collar Advice, the judge said, I love that story you shared with me about working with your dad, because I know what it's like to work as a young boy. And even though you're here, I know you're a man of discipline and character to have to do that. And you didn't have opportunities that a lot of people in this courtroom have, like me, yours truly. So these are the themes you've got to begin to develop in a narrative if you are going to create it on your own. It's not a matter of how beautifully it is written or how perfect it is, but it's a matter of what is the message. In a moment, I'm going to go through an example, but Forrest, perhaps you can do a couple of bit more questions that you might go through with Craig, and then I'm going to begin to go through a narrative, because all of you should have it created, whether you write it with our team or on your own. Even if you're going to prison tomorrow, you need to write this letter.
Sure thing. So picking back up, Craig, I heard you say you started work at 9, shoveling snow. I also know that you found ways to make money while you were in school. Tell me about some of those skills you learned from a young age that maybe influenced career and work later in life.
I was able to speak on stage, mentor, and in the school programs, and coach and do lessons outside of me being a good athlete in baseball. I was able to work with some kids who wasn't as good and focus on hitting or pitching or fielding lessons. And then being in Alcoholics Anonymous, my father and mother, I went to Alateen and I was able to speak at some engagements to be able to make some money as a guest speaker in those type of circumstances, because they wanted the vulnerable, genuine age that I was between 9 and 15.
That's remarkable, especially the public speaking at such a young age, too. I know when they survey most common fears, that is right at the top for most people. So let me ask this, because you talk about being an Al teen. How else did those experiences with your parents with regard to substance use influence you as you aged?
Well, at first it allowed me to not want to do that. But then later on in my life, I kind of slipped into that was the norm of what I saw. And, after some time was able to recognize that some of those things contributed to where I got to today, not making that as an excuse, but it just being a part of the story growing up. Looking back now, it's like, I don't want to do that in the future, but those were kind of a couple of the setbacks that put me into that mode.
I got you.
So this is helpful. And what will happen is 100 questions, 200 questions. It's an interactive discussion when we're creating this, but it really starts with getting specific detailed information. Now, I'm going to share with you a little bit of a bare bones narrative. When our team produces them now, they're much more, I would say, vibrant and developed. This is kind of a internal tool that our team has used to create. So I would do not take this verbatim, but this is an example, kind of a cold open of an internal course that our team has as we train. But this is a sample of an opening. I write, Dear Judge, I write this letter with a great deal of shame and remorse. Pleading guilty to criminal activity can derail peace for any individual. For a person of Indian descent, a criminal conviction is catastrophic and life-altering. I'm humiliated in my community, sickened with grief as I reflect on my weakness of character that led me into this problem. Yet pleading guilty to the charges against me is not enough. I know that many victims have suffered because of my behavior. I cannot excuse what I have done. Although I'm doing everything within my power to make those victims whole, in reality, I also know that I owe an explanation. I'm 52. I've been a poor man. I've been a rich man. Now I'm a man without financial resources again, striving to climb from the depths of despair back into the role of good citizenship. That path begins not only with a full acceptance, but also with the explanation for the actions that resulted in so much loss for people who trusted in me. My explanation will not excuse my conduct, but as I explain my journey, perhaps my victims, the honorable court, my community, and all who sit in judgment of me will have some empathy and mercy in judgment. This is an opening to a sentencing narrative. This is an opening that you should share in a probation interview. You should give to a warden, a case manager, a judge, both verbally and through the written word, if you've pled guilty. Again, going to trial is a fundamentally different mitigation strategy. This is an opening that any of you can use, but it's boilerplate. It's meaningless, as Depeche Mode sang in the 80s. It's meaningless unless there is follow through, unless there is a plan of action. Where judges get pissed off is where they read something that's beautifully written like this. And I can tell you, Michael Santos wrote this in 2016. There have been some edits. This is written well. The problem is, oh, sorry. I didn't know Forrest just texted me. I've been sharing the entire wrong screen. Can you see it now, Forrest? Can you see my screen? Or is it still Slack?
Oh, okay. Now I see it.
Okay, forgive me.
Okay.
Thank you for telling me. This is what I just read. I read the opening to a sentencing narrative that Michael wrote in 2016. And the problem is, if there isn't follow through on this or an active development beyond I'm sorry and how I got here, you're better off turning in nothing at all. From there, the narrative will transition into some background. And this is heavily modified but you get a sense, the background, the career. You've got to be able to describe your background. I would describe mine: opportunity, privilege, wealth. Craig described his: working as a young age, as a young man, having to develop skills, more the school of hard knocks, very relevant. The early career. Can anyone share with me why getting into the early career is so important, perhaps for someone like my judge, Judge Wilson? And I'll share a story why in a moment about my friend Andrew Alchek, who unfortunately died in prison. He had an aneurysm on the track. Why is describing your early career or business so important, perhaps for a sentencing judge? If someone can chime in. Why is getting to that in the narrative important, if someone can tell me?
It shows your development, basically.
So my friend Andrew Alchek, who died in prison, was sentenced to 6 years. Judge Wilson, I read the transcripts at sentencing. Andrew had him sent to prison, and Judge Wilson said, "You are just a born con man. You have never earned a penny legally. You are a charlatan. You are the king of charlatans. You are a thief and a crook. You've never earned a penny lawfully." He grew up in Tuxedo Park, New York, with wealthy parents who had gone to Princeton and Harvard. The point is, if you have worked before, you've got to convey that to your judge. If you are engaged in a fraud or pled guilty or gotten into trouble, the government might think, unless you communicate to them, I think through your own efforts, that you went into business to steal and defraud. I can tell you my client, the hedge fund manager who got 5 years in prison, started his hedge fund with good intentions. He literally tried to make money. He legitimately tried to raise money and make money for people. But then he lost, he lied, he was afraid to say that he failed, he raised more, and he ran a little Ponzi scheme. And I turned the other way for the commissions. At his sentencing hearing, Judge Wilson, who just sentenced Judge Andrew Alchek, I just told you about, said the same thing to him. You are a thief and a crook and a fraud. You wouldn't know how to earn an honest dollar in your life. And I can tell you, my client ran this hedge fund legally for years. He just didn't know how to respond when he lost money. My point follows. Your narrative, your release plan, everything, if you have done it good for a long time, you've got to articulate what that means. If you've paid taxes and built a business or been employed or employed people, you've got to express what that means. If not, they may think all you have ever. Arthur on the webinar here, my friend, just got a great outcome of probation. He's been an accountant for 50, 60 years. He got swept up into some ridiculous scheme. Thank God he didn't go to prison. But he did a good job of letting the judge know, I have led a law-abiding life, Your Honor, for 60 years. I went rogue for a few months. I accept responsibility, but it's not who I am as a person. If you don't tell them that in the sentencing narrative, they may judge you like Judge Wilson. You're a bad dude that just hurts people. And you have to ask yourself, is it stronger if you say it? Now, I know your lawyer will build it into the memorandum. I've seen memorandums that Nicholas has written. They're good. He's a good writer. He's a lawyer in New York. So, of course, the lawyer is going to say that. But is it also influential if they hear it directly from you? And in so doing, you're changing this narrative because there's evidence of it. I want to transition now to Forrest, something that Forrest and I talk about, our team talks about a lot. And this is how you overcome the words are meaningless. And this is really helpful for people who have gone to trial. The narrative has to lay out some vision of what you'll do moving forward, right? If we have the First Step Act that allows a judge to resentence you if you're extraordinary and compelling, if we have Trump coming back into office, like him or not, he passed prison reform. And I don't think he's a huge fan of the criminal justice system. So if we suspect changes are coming, changes have already come, and we know the law allows judges to resentence you because of the First Step Act. And I know people in our community are succeeding. When Michael was in prison, or when I was in prison, it was very hard to get a compassionate release. It's like, even if you're sick, I think Senator Rand Paul said one time, if you have 6 minutes left on your deathbed in the Bureau of Prisons, you still won't get a compassionate release. Okay, that was the BOP for a long time. And I know many of you still think it's that bad. It has gotten better because I know people who have gotten the compassionate release. Sex crimes, burglaries, robberies, murder, not just a white collar crime. And if we can understand that, it makes sense to lay out some vision of what you'll do moving forward. And that's where it's essential that you are honest. Because, and then I'll get back to some questions here with Forrest, and I believe this to be the most important part of the narrative, which is why it should be written immediately. Why it should be written immediately. So let's just say you have a sentencing coming in the next 3-6 months, next week. But you know at some point you're going to come back to your judge for some relief or a probation officer. Can someone explain to me why it's valuable to lay out some vision in the narrative of what you'll do moving forward? Prison professor talent, teach a course in prison, volunteer. I see people in our community who are doing that on our SATIC. I know people who are doing all of that work, right? I know, but why is that valuable? Can someone tell me why it's valuable to lay that out in the narrative?
It shows your commitment to moving forward with your rehabilitation plan.
It shows that you're not, as Judge Pearson told me, you're not full of bullshit. Okay, she's a judge in Ohio, younger judge, liberal judge who gives some really long sentences. My God. But I spoke with her at a conference, and she says what every judge says, what I've heard from judges. I don't want nonsense. I don't want lies. And if the defendant hasn't figured it out, then just tell me the truth, that you don't have it figured out. Don't lie to me. And the value of telling the truth in the narrative is, if you actually begin to figure it out, then you can rewrite it and update it down the road. And you can say, Your Honor, I wrote this in January of 25. I didn't have it figured out. I was still focused on myself and how my own life was imploding. And since then, I've done this. And you can show some of that progress. So, Forrest, perhaps you can spend a couple more minutes with Craig and you can ask Craig, how would you do that with Craig in a narrative? What are the plans moving forward? And then I'll mention why that's so important. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. And Craig, thanks for letting us highlight you, especially because of the good work that you have done I think that you are the exact right person to answer this. So, when we're talking about things that you have done proactively to make amends, show accountability and responsibility, tell me what some of those activities are, especially in the community.
Well, currently, in the last 8 months, every single Tuesday and Thursday, I'm volunteering at the sports facility, working with less fortunate children, about 4 hours each of those days. On Thursday mornings, I go to the soup kitchen and we bag lunches for the homeless and deliver them, feeding about 220 people every Thursday from 8 to 12. And I do some volunteering with this particular group as I came in. I took a course already. I participated with Mr. Santos to be able to be involved in interview of 28 minutes times two. That'll be dispersed and help out over 1 million people amongst the BOP. And I was able to enroll in a class recommended from this group called Brian Hamilton's You Start for entrepreneurs and learning business on the proper way. I do a book report every single week that I review on Friday, and I did it on a Zoom, so I have proof, recording it, doing it, then I wrote it to present it into the talent right here inside this volunteer place. So just really showing documentation, what I'm doing, where documentation beats conversation all day.
Well said.
So we could do this for days. I think that's very important. And I want to summarize it again for all of you. Forrest, thank you. And Craig, thank you for engaging. All of you on this webinar. It's one thing to have 10 pages and 3,500 words. That's important. The words will be meaningless unless there is some vision of what you're going to do after sentencing. Or if you're before probation interview, what you will do between probation and sentencing. Totally meaningless. Craig just identified myriad things he has done, which makes him different. I mean, we're so grateful to have so many people come into our community every month. We're so blessed. Few have worked as hard as him. And even if he gets a guideline sentence, which he's not going to get, what the skills he's developed, the contributions he's given, the dignity he lives with, he's just a little different, and it shows. And we're grateful to help him. I want all of you to be thinking, okay, what can you measure and create? Talent is a phenomenal resource for you. Use your name, call yourself Joe Smith. I don't care. Call yourself something and share your URL with people. It's free. White Collar Advice sponsors it. Money that we raise, we give a lot of money every year to the nonprofit so Michael can run this without ever having to ask anyone for a donation. He self-funds it too. This is how you're extraordinary. Write, share it. Because if you actually went to a sentencing hearing, this is why the person who was so great last week said, my lawyer's doing that. I'm like, what does that even mean? Your lawyer's doing it. That doesn't make any sense. Doing what? They're writing journal entries you're going to send to your probation officer, your pretrial services officer and judge? Really? Show it to me. Well, they're not doing that. I know they're going to write and talk about why you shouldn't go to prison and you didn't have bad intentions. Great. What are you doing? This is what Craig is doing. This is what people in our community who want to do the work do, long past sentencing. So if you're going to write the narrative, lay out some vision of what you'll do moving forward. If you don't know what that is, tell the truth. I have no freaking idea. And rather than give you happy talk and platitudes, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm in crisis, Your Honor, but I want to do better. And then if you actually do better, you can share the progress of how you've done better. So task yourself with some project. Say you're going to write for 30 days. And the beautiful thing about saying you're going to write for 30 days is after about 4 days, here's what's going to happen. Holy good God, I'm out of content. And this is what happens to people who are in prison who try to write, because there's only so much your family's going to want to hear what you ate in the chow hall or what time you got up. So what happens is it requires you to begin reading good literature. And it requires you to begin documenting why you're reading that literature and how it will help you. So presuming you can see my screen, can you see my table of contents here? Can you see okay. Presuming you're doing that work, What if a month from now you had 5 book reports? And this is what our team does. We're creating. We have a whole new slew of lesson plans coming out, all free. If you've been charged, what to consider before getting charged. You're a target. You're going to prison. There'll be a podcast. There'll be a video. 100,000 words here. Our team is creating, and we're going to give it away to all of you. Why aren't you doing the same thing? You should. And you should measure it, and you should document it. Our webinar replays, content ideas, videos I want to film. Do the same thing, and you share it. And if you can include things like this in a sentencing narrative, you will be different from every other defendant who says, I'm sorry, I didn't have bad intentions. I'll never do it again. Please show me mercy. I have a family. And I just don't think it has the impact any longer. I don't think it works. Then what I would do after you're sentenced, and we're going to get into the release plan next week. We have people in our community before sentencing, we're doing their release plan. After you're sentenced, what you should do is you should take into consideration everything the judge said to you, good or bad. We're doing one right now where the judge said some horrific things to this defendant, and it was a big fraud, right? And rather than run from it, he's going to share in his plan exactly what the judge said to him and his plans to do better. And basically saying, my words are meaningless. Here's my plans moving forward. And then if he does them, he will be looked at differently. And I've shared examples with you of how that has actually worked. And I could share them again now. I won't, but I'm happy to send them to you in the replay because we've written about those clients. It's 1:48 already. Any questions about the narrative that I can address or answer? Structure, opening, length, where, with whom to give it? Any questions? Because the takeaway for this webinar, I think, is that you're going to write it and you're going to begin to develop an asset sheet that you can track your progress as we do, as Michael taught me.
I'm not, writing is one of my weaknesses, so I don't know. I'm not good at I don't even like text messaging. I rather talk to somebody on the phone. So it's really a weakness of mine.
We all have weaknesses. I would argue that I would prefer to speak better. If it's a weakness and you're a better communicator than writer, then talking to your iPhone, and then you can have it transcribed. Tell the truth,
Okay.
Your Honor. Writing isn't something that's been a part of my past, but I'm writing to share details about my life and how I got here and my plans moving forward. Just be honest. Don't lie. We have someone convicted at trial looking at more than 2 decades in prison for a white-collar crime, and basically said, I don't agree with the jury's verdict, but I love this country. I respect our country. I respect this system. Jurors convicted me. I see it differently. I'm grateful that my excellent lawyers are going to handle the appeal for me. While my lawyers are doing that, I want to tell you more about me. I want to tell you how my father came to this country as a young man with few resources and how he raised a family. Okay, let the lawyers handle the appeal. He's going to get into details of his own life that do nothing to jeopardize the appeal. But at least the judge is going to learn more about him. Nicholas has been sitting patiently. Nicholas, maybe you can unmute yourself there in New York if you can still hear us and chime in for a bit from the lawyer's perspective, Nicholas, as we wrap up this narrative. Because Nicola and I, we've worked together for about 10 years now. We've done a lot of these narratives together, and he's a progressive and good lawyer who understands the value of the asset. So
Thank you,
Nicholas,
Justin.
chime in from the lawyer perspective.
I'm definitely in favor of the narrative. I'm a convert. I've been doing this for many, many years. I like what you heard earlier. I want to see it in the probation report. Why? Because the probation report is written from the government's perspective, just chapter and verse from the agent speaking to the probation officer. And you should take that opportunity to get your side of it across to the judge. It's going to be in there. It's going to be in there. If you do service, if you serve a custodial term, it's going to follow you around. So your case manager, will understand, your unit manager will understand that you're not a bad person. You're just a person who happened to do a bad thing. So take every opportunity to inform the court, inform whoever the listener will be, whether it's the BOP or your sentencing judge or the probation officer. Great to get it out. I love what you're saying about creating the content, but as I'm sitting here, your you're loquacious and you're a writer, but I can see some of these people it may be daunting for them. So I don't want them to be discouraged. I want them to think they can take it in bites and bits and start small. They don't have to create this whole body of work like you've done. They can just start small and just create a little bit and then add to it and then add to that. So that's what I have to say about what you were just saying.
I love what before you share that point, I want to share something that Nick just said. Can you see my screen here, everyone? Do you see this? Do you see this where my timeline? So what you just said is perfect. It's that stonecutter's analogy. It's not the first or the 101st hit that breaks the stone. It's everyone in between. My business, White Collar Advice, started the 14th of October, 2008, where I was sitting alongside Michael Santos in prison, and I wrote this blog and sent it home to my mom. The following is my first blog. It's Sunday, October 28th. I'm in my assigned cubicle at Taft's minimum security camp. I wasn't thinking about a book or a narrative or 10,000 words or 20,000 words. This was 300 words, but I wanted to memorialize it. And then I did 200 the next day and 300. You chip away at it every single day, and then you build a record that is indisputable. And thankfully, you don't need millions of people in your community. You just need a few people. I had 2 friends that stood alongside me. 3 if you include Michael. 1 is really all you need, frankly. I had 3, and I attribute so much of my success to their support of me and believing in me as people ran for me. But Nick's point is perfect. If you can't write the narrative today from start to finish with that flow, write 100 words, write another 100 tomorrow and 100 the next day. Because then you wake up and what do you have? You have an asset, you have a book, and you should be able to memorialize that book in your asset sheet that I shared with you a little bit earlier. Build it. So Nick, thank you for sharing that. It's easier for me to say because I've been doing this for 15 years and this is my life. I understand that.
But even if they can't chip away at, they can just make bullet points and have somebody help them. Anyway, just get it down on paper. That's the key.
I can help people if they're interested.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I want to be careful about messaging. Someone asked, can we share that template? No, we don't, because we've been burned. People will take it, they'll plagiarize it, try to put it into their own words, not get the outcome they want, say, well, I got this from you, and I look at what they got and it's wrong, and they don't know how to do it. You can't just copy and paste something and expect it to influence a federal judge. People steal our work, they plagiarize it. Everything that's out there in this space is something that Michael Santos created. The release plan, now ubiquitous in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, others are trying to create them in a way that is keeping people in prison longer. So do your due diligence, do your research, create properly. But no, there's only so much our team can give away because it's people don't know how to use the asset. They just think they could take copy, paste, 15 minutes later, I'm done, send it to the judge. And they wonder why they don't get the outcome you want. Because you don't get the outcome you want if you're not willing to introspect and do the work. So the answer to that is no. But we have given away so much on how to create it with what judges do and whatnot. But I can't bear the responsibility when people get lazy and can't do the work. And I'm not saying you will, but I've been doing this for too long. So the answer to that question is I cannot.
Justin,
Yep.
I'm not sure, but does everybody understand that it seems like the probation officers are overworked and they don't have enough time to do their job, so that if you make it easier for them, they appreciate it and they'll give you a better outcome.
Yes. So that actually aligns with something that I shared a message last week with Dr. Khan in our community, and I'll see if I could pull it up here. But in a message that he sent recently, I shared it last week. He commented how the probation officer appreciated how much work he had done for the probation interview, including getting the narrative. And the probation officer said, "You did my job for me. Thank me." So that's exactly Arthur's point. They're very busy. They're overworked. And to the extent that you can help them, as Nicholas said, the government's preparing this report. So having more of your messaging in there is a good idea. We are going to talk about the release plan next week and actually go through a release plan, but someone did have to ask. Oh, actually, John, are you still on here? My friend John Spivey. We've had so many comments today. And John, are you still?
Yeah,
John,
good to see you.
All right, John, I'll come to you in 30 seconds. This is my good friend John from Louisiana. We've golfed together. Great dude. Good to see you. Give me 1 second. Someone commented on the release plan that their loved one is in prison and the probation officer or the case manager loved it. I think that's great. they should just send it to their judge. Don't overwhelm a federal judge, but say, Your Honor, I've written this plan since my surrender to prison. I want to share my progress with you. I'm going to write you again in 6 months or whenever it is. So that's what you should do. My friend John here, if you can unmute yourself, John, has gone through this process with our team. Please chime in, John, on the narrative in that process with Forrest. And I know your lawyers were very supportive of it once we were done.
Yeah, I just want to be on this call just because I've just finished this whole process with Forrest. It was, it's work, just said, but so while I think in the end of it for me, Forrest and I probably spent 8 or 10 hours on Zooms going back and forth through interviews and him asking those kinds of questions that you just heard him ask. But at the end of it, I got a rough draft from the team, and then he and I culled that draft and, continued to fine tune it for probably several weeks. But at the end of all that, I had this wonderful document that I could then share with my attorneys. By the way, I still haven't had a sentencing date. Hadn't had my first probation interview yet, so I'm still about 6 months or 9 months out from all that. But I was getting ahead of all this, and so bottom line, submitted to my attorneys. They were blown away by it all. I don't think they've ever seen anything like this, and these guys are all assistant U.S. attorneys in their past and now work for law firms doing work. So definitely hit home with them and has been super amazing. Last thing I'll say is I think it was, you mentioned this early on when we got started, hugely beneficial for me to go through the process of this writing because it really helped put in perspective for me. There's a lot of denial that you go through, I think, in this process. And so for me, it helped me spend really quality time inside myself, really thinking about my past, how I got involved, why. And so really got me into a much better place to move forward. So that's a huge benefit for doing it as well.
Thank you for chiming in, John. Happy New Year. Good to see you. Thank you very much.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Just let me slip in one more question, please.
Sure.
How do you do this stuff while you're in prison since they don't let you on the internet or iPhones in prison? How do you get this material out to the world?
It's simple. There's email, core links. You can send an email. You can handwrite it as Michael Santos and I did from prison before email. You handwrite it and you send it home. So you don't need the internet to do it. There's resources in the library. There's resources family year can send you, and you create. That is I don't view as an issue. As we wrap up, it's 1:58. Thank you everyone for joining. We have had a lot of comments and questions. Here's what you can expect from our team. By Wednesday, I will have the replay up along with an invitation to register for next week's webinar, where we're going to go through a release plan format and begin to develop that asset. And you'll see how the narrative ties into it. If there's any questions I haven't answered, forgive me, but I think we got through most of them. And I'm really grateful that you're in our community. So if that's it, I'm happy to wrap up the webinar unless there's any other questions.
Just a real quick one. Your microphone is really stellar. What is it? What's the brand and the model?
It's a good question. I will send it out. My wife bought it for me because I think my partner, Michael Santos, said, buy Justin a new microphone, and she did. So,
right. It's super wonderful.
Thank you. It's a blue, I'll send it. It's a blue, I don't know. I'm not great at stuff like that. Michael actually set up my whole office. If you saw these lights in here, he's not just a writer, he's a tech dude. I don't know the answer, but I'll put a PS in there when I put up the webinar replay.
Thank you so much.
But it was a gift
Thank you
from my lovely wife,
moving
Sandra.
Forward.
Thank you very much. That Blue Yeti, there he is. Maybe it's, yes.
It's Cheryl. Quick
Hi.
question. Do you work with people that are wrongfully convicted?
Well, that tells, sure, that when I hear wrongly convicted, that tells me someone who went to trial and lost and is maintaining their innocence. And the answer is absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Yeah.
We want to work with anyone willing to do the work and try to change the government's version of events. I mean, we want anyone, any type of crime, presuming someone's willing to do the work. It's not easy, I know. Okay.
I had a quick question.
Yep.
Yeah, Justin, you were saying you don't give out the things that you have, right? Some of the stuff you have because people, use it in different ways they shouldn't use it. But did you say that the content sheet was you going to give that out or not?
Yeah, I'm going to share an example of that content sheet. I will. I'm going to create a little one that you're going to have to modify. But it's a Google Doc, but it's a good thing. Like even if you create your talent profile, right? You're going to have a URL for each one, but it's a good idea just to at it. And I'll tell you where it's also beneficial. We could do a whole damn webinar on this, but we won't. We probably should at some point. There are some people in our community who get a shorter sentence and volunteer work with our nonprofit through prison professors, right? So this is someone who's actually on our board. His name is Augustin Hunis. He's a winemaker, owns Quintessa and Prisoner brand, ironically. Augustin was sentenced to 5 months in prison, and he got 500 hours of 250. I always get it wrong, 250 or 500 hours. 500 hours of community service sentenced out in Boston by Judge Gorton. But he did a very good job of documenting a lot of the work and writing that he had done. And then when he started probation and he did his volunteer hours through the nonprofit, because he did it before sentencing, he was able to share his entire sheet with his probation officer. And that's also where he tracked his same community service hours. So it was just seamless. It was done. He was able to, I think, go to Portugal. I mean, it was just, but that comes back to the words are meaningless. He could show it, and then the PO could actually click it and see it. So that's why there's value of beginning to build this. So like Sadek, with whom I'm going to speak tomorrow, this is that's the purpose of the call tomorrow, right? These are what are we building and showing and sharing, not just for sentencing, but for a year, 3, 5, 6 years from now. And if Michael created this template for me, I didn't do it. He gave it to me. And it's something that Scotty will get a text from me he'll create something and I'll say, is it on the sheet? Because if it's not on the sheet, it didn't happen. We need to be able to see it. And so Joey, that answer, I'll share that with you, and I'm going to see you later this month too, and we'll spend some time on it as well. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. Good call earlier. Okay, this is a good webinar, Forrest. I always do. I always congratulate my own webinars. It's terrible. I don't think it's a good skill, but I can't help it. I'm really proud that we're here and you're here. So we're going to wrap it up. I'll see all of you next Monday. And thank you all very much for joining, Forrest, Craig, and everyone for contributing. Okay, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.